So, hi everyone, and welcome to our latest Biome podcast with Emma and Roby. This week we are going to be talking about reindeer reintroduction in the UK, hence why I'm sat here wearing antlers. And also we thought we'd make this kind of like a little Christmassy episode because reindeer are quite festive, so why not?
And just in case you thought I wasn't getting in the festive spirit, I don't have any antlers and I couldn't go out and get some because we're now in tier 3, which is fun, but I have festive presents,
Ooh, nice.
which will go under the tree soon. So that's my Christmas contribution to this episode.
So yeah, hopefully this will give you a bit of an overview of reindeer. We're going to talk a little bit about their very complex kind of species biology.
Super complex. Even more complex than orcas.
Which is saying a lot. And then we'll run through some of the adaptations they have, because obviously they live in really harsh climates, so they need to be well adapted. And then towards the end we'll talk about our reindeer that we have here in the UK, because I think a lot of people might not realise that we have reindeer. I certainly didn't until a couple of months ago.
I had no idea until we started thinking about this whole reintroduction podcast, and I was like, oh, what did we used to have? And I went on the Wikipedia article of all the extinct animals in Britain, and I was like, reindeer? We never had reindeer, but apparently we did.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting. So you'll get to hear about that later, about where they are in the UK. So just to start with a little overview. So the reindeer we're talking about that are in the UK is Rangifer tarandus, that's the Latin name. And so reindeer are artiodactyls, which means they're these even-toed ungulates, and they're in the Cervidae family, which includes things like deer. What else is in the Cervidae family, Roby?
Deer. Cervidae is the deer family.
Okay, it's just lots of deer.
So they are, in fact, deer. Yeah.
It's in the name, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
it really is in that regard.
But reindeer are very interesting in that they have a very sort of wide distribution. So they have what's known as a circumpolar distribution. Sort of. It kind of varies where they are in the world. But so they're kind of native to Arctic, subarctic. They live in sort of areas like tundra, boreal and mountainous regions. And this is in Northern Europe, Siberia and North America. And interestingly, there are both sedentary and migratory populations. And in a minute, Roby will talk about the complexities of that.
Yeah, I hope you've all got your listening caps on.
And just kind of to give you an idea of how big they are, they can weigh between 65 and about 210 kilos. The males tend to be larger.
So that's a decent sized deer, isn't it?
Yeah, over 200 kilos is quite large, and over 2 meters high, which is
2 meters high.
Apparently, but I assume they're counting antlers in that, because
they must be counting antlers in that, because 2 meters high is elk size.
I was gonna say that's like bison.
Yeah. I think they must be including antlers in that measurement.
Yeah, I'm sure they are, because otherwise that would be pretty huge. But interestingly, kind of about the antlers is that reindeer are unusual in that both the male and the females grow antlers. So even the little ones, the yearlings, will start to grow antlers. And kind of just to highlight the difference between antlers and horns, antlers will be shed every year, whereas horns continuously grow.
And in general, when you're looking at artiodactyls, if it's got antlers, it's almost always a member of the Cervidae family, so deer have antlers. If it's got horns, it's usually a member of the Bovidae family, which is things like cattle, bison, but also antelopes. And then if we go into the kind of Caprinae family, that's all your sheep and goats, and they've got horns as well. So really, Cervidae, the deer family, are the only ones with antlers.
Okay.
But reindeer are quite unusual with that, aren't they? With their antlers?
In what? In the regard that both sexes?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's something that's kind of unique to them versus other deers, because mostly it's just the males that will grow antlers. But one other really funky thing about reindeer, this is such a me kind of fact, it's random and I love it. So obviously they're living in these extreme Arctic conditions. Often you can have very, very severe weather conditions and blizzards, so there's not much visibility, sound doesn't travel very far. So how they can communicate and locate each other is they have these tendons in their feet which click when they walk.
Ooh.
Which I kind of want to hear
cool.
that.
The clicking of the reindeer, yeah. Although that's actually a trait not limited to cervidae. So I know eland, which these large antelopes in Africa, also have the clicky tendons because they do it when they're living in dense forest. So I guess this might be perhaps more common than we think. This kind of clicky communication. I would be really good at that because I click my knuckles all the time.
I guess maybe it travels further, whereas like vocalizations might get muffled in, like you were saying, dense forest or a blizzard. That click, it kind of can travel far distances. Like, I mean, it's not echolocation, but the same idea that those clicks do travel further.
And I guess in dense conditions, you get stuff like all the birds in the rainforest, they make these short, sharp calls because that's what travels farther, isn't it? That's very cool.
Yeah, it is. So do you want to talk a bit about the complexities of reindeer?
So, some of you may be wondering what the difference is between reindeer and caribou, or if there is a term you should be using. I thought reindeer was what I thought about it is, I think we should call orca instead of killer whales, because orca is the more precise terminology and killer whales is a erroneous term we ascribe to them. So I thought this was something similar. I thought it was just Europeans who called them reindeer, but actually the people who live with these animals call them caribou, and so that's why I always called them caribou, but this is in fact not the case. So get ready for some deep, darkest taxonomy.
I love that.
So the species is Rangifer tarandus. That's the species across the world. In Eurasia, the species is called reindeer, and in North America, the species is called caribou.
Okay, so it's
but
just
these are not just
a difference in kind of naming then. Okay.
Yeah. But these are not actually two different subspecies. They're not just caribou subspecies and reindeer subspecies. Within caribou and within reindeer, you've got a whole host of subspecies. So caribou, you've got stuff like the Labrador caribou, which lives in tundra. You've got the barren ground caribou in the high Arctic, also in tundra. But then you've got other caribou, like the Osborne's caribou, which lives in woodland. The Newfoundland caribou also lives in woodland. And then the boreal and migratory and mountain caribous all live in woodland.
That's a lot of caribous.
Yeah, so even within caribou, you've got different subspecies segregated not just by area but by habitat, and the same thing is found in reindeer. So in Eurasian reindeer, you've got stuff like the busk reindeer, the Finnish forest reindeer, which live in woodland. You've got the Novaya Zemlya reindeer, which lives in islands, and then you've got stuff like the tundra reindeer and the Siberian forest reindeer, which obviously live in tundra and forests. And the genetics of these animals is really weird because populations from the same subspecies can have different demographic and behavioural adaptations, but at the same time, populations from different subspecies have evolved the same similar demographic and behavioural patterns.
That's very confusing.
So actually, species is really not a helpful term or a helpful way to think of Rangifer tarandus. We should really be thinking of them more as ecotype, as opposed to species. So then you've got the woodland ecotype, the island ecotype, the tundra ecotype, and so on and so forth. So yeah, if you're not confused, that's impressive because I really am, and I'm looking forward to never thinking about reindeer taxonomy ever again after this.
No, it is remarkably confusing, I think, because we, in doing this research, kind of it's changed on different resources that we read, our different opinions, which makes it even more confusing. I think, thank you, Roby, for doing some digging into reindeer.
Well, it is very hard because there's quite a few like very serious papers by serious reindeer scientists who say, yes, no, species is bonkers. No, it's all about ecotype. And then there's other papers which say, no, it's just reindeer and caribou are the subspecies. And then there are other papers which say, no, there's like 15 subspecies. And so I have no idea which one to go with. So I just went with the more complex one.
No, I think that's a good kind of overview. As complex as it is, I feel like before maybe we had oversimplified it a bit in kind of just classifying reindeer and caribou as just separate subspecies. But like you just said, there's a lot more to it. It's more complex. And
obviously, these are animals which, as we've said, live around the pole, but they've got these incredible ecotypes like woodland and tundra. And because of this, they've got some intriguing adaptations to this quite harsh environment. Would you like to tell us about some of those?
Yeah, they have some really, really interesting ones. So just to highlight a few, we're going to provide the link. This is a resource by the University of Fairbanks, Alaska. So if you want to check out more of them, you can have more detail on that. So
again, serious reindeer people.
Yeah, very serious reindeer people. They have a lot of reindeer. So one of the interesting ones is that they have these things called brow tines that protect their eyes. So these are sections of the antler. These sorry, they're not very realistic. But on actual antlers, you'll have these kind of protruding sections called brow tines, and they will protect the reindeer's eyes. So when they're scraping sort of in the snow, when they're feeding on trees, when they're sparring with each other. So that's a good mechanism of protecting their eyes.
And we're going to put up this image of a reindeer here so you can actually see these brow tines. If you look at the antlers, they've got these... The brow tines, are they the forward pointing bits,
yeah,
are they?
so the bit there that you can see by the eyes, those sections there are the brow tines.
Mm-hmm.
And then... I guess another interesting thing, this is obviously something that's shared by a lot of animals in extreme climates, is their ability to camouflage. So they have really, really interesting coat coloration. So quite a big variety actually in the coloration that you get. So in captive herds where humans have kind of selectively been breeding them, you get a much greater variety of colours. So you can have completely white reindeer, you can have brown, you can have to all black, and that's more a result of human selection of that range. But when they're...
And that's interesting.
Yeah, so actually we'll provide the link to that as well. It's the reindeer that we have here in the UK. They have the whole spectrum of kind of mottled, white, brown. Really,
cool.
Really interesting, and they all have names as well, which is great.
And this coloration, as I understand it, is also linked to subspecies and therefore ecotype as well. So we're going to put up an image here. You've got this on the left. You've got this boreal woodland caribou. Let me get this right. So one of the larger subspecies, and you can see it's got a much more darker coat coloration because even in winter, in these woodland environments, it needs that dark coloration to blend in with the trees and break up its outline. And then on the right, you've got this Svalbard reindeer. So across the world in Eurasia and living on these open islands of Svalbard, and you can see it's much whiter and kind of scragglier to blend in with the snow. So I think quite cool, this variation between species.
Yeah, no, that
subspecies.
is really interesting as well. Like some, like we were saying, have different colorations on the underside and the upper side, sort of based on... I'm not sure why that would be hugely beneficial, but I guess to blend in with more like rock coloration on the bottom and then lighter on the top if it's snow. That's just a guess, but it does vary quite a lot.
And one of the really cool adaptations that we came across when we were researching this is flotation.
Yes.
So... Reindeer have really good buoyancy because they've got these fantastic hollow guard hairs on their underside. So if you've ever seen them swimming, as you might have done, they usually swim on like planet Earth or something when they go up to the north. They actually ride really high in the water, so they're really strong swimmers because they've got to cross these islands in their migrations. And you don't really think of deer being, strong swimmers, but reindeer are really, really up there with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Like you said, you see in those documentaries, it's even the calves have to cross these kind of raging rivers, and they're just like bobbing along, floating really high, which is, they have to be able to do it from a young age, so I guess that's very beneficial. And then a very interesting thing that they have going on with their nose is...
Tell me about the nose of the reindeer. Is it red? Is it a red-nosed reindeer?
I mean, yes, but this is internal. So what they have is, because they live in really, really cold environments, they have to have a way to warm up the cold air as it's coming into their lungs. Otherwise, that would be quite harmful for the lungs and the way that they breathe. We don't have that, so we'd probably do quite badly in extreme cold environments.
I do very badly.
Me too.
Very dry skin on my nose.
So what they have is, we won't look at this in an actual reindeer because obviously you can't cut open a reindeer's nose. But so it appears like these rolled newspapers, and it's actually called a rolled scroll.
That's cool.
Yeah, it really is. And like we've done this before in like A levels and things like that, that if that kind of shape, it increases the surface area. So it has this large surface area in the nostrils. And so what this mechanism does is it warms the air before it reaches the lungs. And then there's also an interesting thing with water. So water in the expired air condenses in the cooler portion of the nostrils, and then it moistens incoming air. It's a very complex kind of mechanism.
That's incredible. And that's worth pointing out, actually, that this kind of adaptation to having highly developed nostrils at high latitudes has popped up again in Bovidae. So the fantastic Saiga antelope, which we're also just going to show you just because I feel like you have to see this animal.
Oh my goodness,
look
awesome.
At its nose.
Look at it.
It's got the same I don't know if it's a rolled up scroll, but it's got the same adaptation to warming the air in its nose. So that's very, very cool.
Yeah.
So obviously we're talking a lot about reindeer, and they're very important for, I don't know, what you consider Christmas and the festive period. But reindeer have been important for humans for much longer, haven't they?
Yeah, so sort of for thousands of years, you have lots of predominantly many nomadic people who have relied on reindeer and caribou for thousands and thousands of years. So it would be for things like their meat, their fat, their skins, which they could then use in things like bedding and tents. And then also they can use their antlers for tools as well. So this has been very important in places like Sweden, Finland, Russia. So these nomadic sort of farming communities that rely on herding reindeer. And this is, it's been vitally important for them and continues to be. So I think that's why it's important as we move forward with conservation of reindeer, we need to engage the people that know the reindeer best.
And that's incredible. I mean, it sounds like a fantastic way of life. I'd love to be a nomadic reindeer herder. It would be amazing. Leave all your worries behind and just go herd the reindeer up in the Arctic. So really cool people, if you want to learn more about these incredible people's lifestyles, are the Sami or Sami? I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Sami. And they live in northern Finland and Russia, and they are these fantastic reindeer herders, and they have sleds pulled by reindeer and stuff. And so I was reading about them just doing research, and they're incredible. So yeah, if you're interested in reindeer herders, read more about the Sami people of Finland.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess because I know this is a very different year to normal. It's not quite the festive period that we maybe wanted it to be. But we'll just tell you a little bit about kind of the association with Christmas and kind of where that came about, because I had no idea. I was when I was researching this, I'm like, how did it come to be that we have flying reindeer with Santa Claus? So apparently they first became associated with Santa Claus in a poem published by William Gilly, I think that's how you say his name, in 1821.
Never heard of him.
Neither have I, but apparently that was the first association. And then there's also the famous poem, which I don't think you know, Roby.
No, I don't actually. I feel like I should, but I don't.
Okay, maybe it's the poem "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," which maybe I listened to it as an audiobook as a kid. Like, it was a little cassette tape, and I used to love it. But that was in 1823. And it's a poem by Clement Clark Moore. That's quite a long name to say.
Clement Clark
and
Moore.
That was when they had the idea of flying reindeer with Santa Claus. But interestingly, the idea of flying reindeer dates back much, much further than this. So there are these standing stones in places like Mongolia and somewhere called the Altai Mountains, and these are sort of ancient burial grounds, and they're depicting these flying reindeer on these stones, which is intriguing.
That's so cool. Shall we go? I'd love to go to the Altai Mountains of Mongolia and see shamanic standing stones. That seems amazing.
I'd quite like to be there right now. Just live out the rest of the pandemic there.
Okay, next opportunity we get, we're going to Mongolia. So obviously this is trying to be a really good, feel-good Christmas episode, so we're not going to blow you away with doom and gloom about the reindeer. And actually, as a species, there are locally declining populations, but the species as a whole is robust. But we will just quickly touch on some of the little threats that they might face in these localised regions, because we think it's important for everyone to be aware of them. And then we'll go on to some other interesting things about reindeer, including how they're coming back to the UK, which is very exciting.
Yeah, so yeah, like we said, we won't make this too depressing. Some of the other ones have been very hard hitting. When I was listening back to them, I was like, wow, okay, they were dark. But so just to mention, as we've all heard, it's been in the news for, well, decades. Where people are starting to wake up to this more recently. So the idea of a warming Arctic climate. So predominantly caused by human activities. There are some natural causes, but mainly anthropogenic factors, which are
100%.
which are resulting in a warming climate. And what happens with that in relation to reindeer is that this could actually change the distribution of plants, because if it warms too much, this could affect the plant types that are able to grow in the Arctic. And in the winter, if with melting ice and warmer temperatures, it might mean that plants are covered in ice rather than snow. So it means that these adaptations, we didn't mention this one, but they have these huge hooves that they can use to kind of walk in the snow and dig for lichen and other plants like that. So it means that some of these adaptations that are beneficial to them in these extreme climates, they might not have any use if it is
interesting.
warm.
I hadn't thought about that. How their own adaptation might actually turn against them as the climate changes. Yeah. That's very interesting. I mean, some of the other threats, just to briefly mention them on caribou and reindeer, are quite common, and you could probably tick them off on your head as you go through. So, land use as land use in the high Arctic increases for fossil fuel exploitation. These are very migratory species, and their territories cross territorial and national boundaries, and so if you haven't got kind of bilateral and sometimes even multilateral protection of these animals, they will habitually move out of conservation areas and become under threat there. So yeah, that's the kind of overview of the threats of the reindeer. We won't go into it too much. Let's get into the really interesting stuff, which is reindeer in the UK.
Yes, so this is very, very exciting. So today, currently, you only have you get wild reindeer in Europe, in the Nordic countries, and Russia. That much of where they used to be, they maybe aren't there anymore. And interestingly, like we just mentioned a couple of the threats, it's either thought that could be due to a warming climate after the Ice Age period, or due to human hunting pressures. But it's interesting that this is a case where we don't actually know what caused, say in the UK, the reindeer to go extinct in the first place. Was it climate? Was it humans? It's not clear.
So when did they go extinct in the UK? Because we know reindeer are a glacial species, and so as the glaciers retreated at the end of the Ice Age, their range got further and further and further and further and further north.
Yeah.
But when in the UK did they go?
So it's thought that they haven't been in the UK for about 800 years. So the 13th century is the last time they were thought to have been roaming wild, kind of in Scotland.
But that's well after the end of the Ice Age, though.
I know.
So maybe the last Scottish reindeer were a kind of a relict population, because they were up in like really, really north, like is it Caithness or something?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure with that one actually, because obviously the reindeer that were brought back into the UK, they were brought back in 1952. So that's quite. I don't know. I don't know how to put this. I'm not exactly sure when they were absent from the UK, and I think part of that is because people don't know. I mean, you have these amazing caves called the Bone Caves.
Are they the Bone Caves of Ichnadamp?
They are!
I love the Bone Caves of Ichnadamp. I've never been, but we need to go just because it's got such a cool name.
No, it is awesome. We should definitely go. So this was thought to be a traditional carving ground, this kind of area. And based on the bones and sort of evidence they found there, that was when they kind of suggested that reindeer died out sort of after the last Ice Age. So,
I guess reindeer present a really difficult but really relevant problem in that we don't know whether they disappeared at the end of the Ice Age because the end of the Ice Age resulted in the grasslands turning to forests, or they disappeared because we hunted the horses and the reindeer to extinction, and therefore, because they weren't managing the landscape, the grasses turned to forest. And with something like this, especially Ice Age and especially glacial fauna, it is really hard, I think. We just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very unclear and interesting because a lot of the other reintroductions we've done, it's been a clear, mainly human-caused decline, whereas for this one, climate is likely to have played at least a significant role. But so say now in the UK, there is only one free-ranging herd that we have. And this is in the Cairngorms in the Scottish Highlands.
Oh, love the Cairngorms.
Have you ever been, Roby? Have you ever been to the Cairngorms?
I've never been, but every single species reintroduction, we're always like, bring them back in the Cairngorms. So I feel like I know them quite well.
I would love to go. I mean, this is they've said it's one of the only places in the UK that would be suitable for reindeer because obviously it's still got these sort of subarctic conditions, lots of snow cover in the winter and things like that. But yeah, I definitely think we should go. So with regards to the reindeer, there was this awesome Swedish man called Mikle Utsi,
Great
and
name.
his wife Ethel Lindgren. Great names, both of them. And so he had a reindeer. I don't know if it was his or he knew people who had a reindeer herd in Sweden. And so
he knew a guy who had a reindeer dealer, is what we're saying.
Yeah, he was very in on what was going on with reindeer. And so he decided to ship in reindeer from Sweden to the Cairngorms.
And so if they're from Sweden, I think they're probably either Finnish forest reindeer or mountain reindeer, I think. Would be the subspecies. I'm not going to go through the subspecies name because I don't know it for those subspecies.
Yeah, I think it definitely could be either of those two. And so basically this was his experiment. He wanted to prove that the Cairngorms was a suitable habitat for reindeer. So I don't know how he managed to do this, but anyway. I think what happened was there was they sort of came in different groups. So the first group, I think, had 2 bulls and 5 cows, and they travelled to Scotland by ship. And then apparently they spent 28 days quarantining in Edinburgh Zoo.
Ain't that topical?
And then they were released into the Cairngorms. And I think there are now 150, I think, in the herd at the moment.
That's cool. And I know there's a bit people aren't quite sure, and we couldn't quite figure out when researching if these were truly wild animals or if only some of them were wild and some of them were habituated. What did you think in the end? Because I couldn't find a solution.
My understanding is that they have this reindeer centre up in the Cairngorms. And so this is obviously a big tourist attraction. So these reindeers will be used for Christmas events, so pulling Santa sledges in towns and things like that. You can adopt a reindeer, so you can actually go and visit a specific reindeer, which is helping feed them and conserve them. And so I feel like there's a subset of the population that is practically tame, and then the rest is sort of left to roam in a very large area in the Cairngorms. I think it's several thousand hectares in the Cairngorms.
Oh wow!
Nice. And so that was my understanding, that they're free to roam, but there is a subgroup that's kind of a bit more tame and more there for the tourists.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So obviously these are imports from Scandinavian animals, and we know that it's obviously a good thing that they've been reintroduced there. I assume they have a positive effect on the environment, as all grazers do when they're, native species in a native environment. But what is interesting is that other reindeer and caribou introductions have gone quite well elsewhere. So the effect of Europeans reaching the New World, we killed a lot of reindeer, and in particular 2 subspecies went extinct. Caribou. We killed a lot of caribou. 2 subspecies have gone extinct, but they've been reintroduced, I know, to Alaska, Canada, Iceland and Greenland, as well as lots of other small Arctic islands. So as a species, they seem to be quite resilient and quite well suited to reintroduction. The only trouble in the UK would be, I think the Cairngorms are probably the only place where the habitat still exists.
Yeah, I feel like they are quite versatile, and like you said, we mentioned some of the threats, but they are doing quite well as a species. But yeah, I don't really think, other than introducing more into the Cairngorms and kind of building up the herd numbers there, I can't see any other habitat, especially as our climate warms, it'll be increasingly hard.
And maybe that's not the end. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's entirely possible that reindeer are, well, we know they are a member of the glacial fauna, and we're currently in an interglacial period, so perhaps it's unwise to expect that us to be able to, release the reindeer in Kent. But I think it would be quite nice as, conservation in the Scottish Highlands increases. I think it would be nice to see some more reindeer, especially in the Cairngorms and things, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so I think maybe just to wrap up, we could talk about some of the things, like positive things that are happening to try and conserve them. So the WWF have been really, really good with reindeer conservation, as they are with a lot of animal groups. So one thing they've been doing is trying to promote sustainable quotas. So this is in places like Greenland. They've been advocating for sustainable hunting quotas to sort of make sure that too many aren't being hunted, and then in turn this sort of keeps the ecosystem in check, which I think is quite important. And like we mentioned as well, you've got people like the Sami, I hope I'm saying that right, which they are trying to support local voices on reindeer and caribou. So you've got the caribou in Canada supporting the herders there, kind of working with the communities and kind of educating them about conservation issues and actually involving them in the decision-making processes regarding any laws or legislation and things like that with caribou, which is very important. And then another thing they're doing is they're also monitoring reindeer poaching in Russia, so kind of supporting anti-poaching raids and improving population monitoring as well. So lots of good stuff going on with reindeer.
Cool. So shall we finish with a quick little reintroduction summary, and then we can give our scores for reintroduction?
Yep, sounds good. We always have different scores, but
I know.
So, little bit of a question mark about when they were lost from the UK, possibly after the last ice age, but some sources saying that they were here 800 years ago. So something to maybe...
a little bit of a gap there.
Something to explore a little bit more. But we know for sure that they were reintroduced in the UK in 1952 by Mikle Utse and Dr. Ethel Lindgreen. There are now about 150 of them in the Cairngorms in the Scottish Highlands. And so does the habitat exist for them? Yes, but where they are currently. So the Cairngorms is kind of the only place for them.
So I think the answer is yes, but no.
Yes. So what are you going to give them as like a reintroduction score, Roby? What's your
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, that is a really good question. I'm going to give them a 6.
Ooh, why so low? I'm intrigued.
Because they're a really good species for reintroduction, but I don't think there's anywhere we could reintroduce them beyond where the current 150 are. Because like if it was going to be higher than that, it would have to be, like the links. There's the Kielder Forest, Thetford Forest, Cairngorms, Northumberland and stuff. But with the reindeer, it's literally just the Cairngorms, and they're kind of already there. Like, you can't really introduce them to Kent because the Arctic tundra isn't there. So I'm going to go, and that might be just a result of us living in an interglacial period. That might not be a human thing. So I'm going to go for a 6. I'm glad they're here, and I think we should have more where they are, but I don't think we can. I think it would be cruel on them to just dump them in, West Sussex.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. I was going to go a bit higher, possibly like a 9, an 8 or a 9.
Okay. Should we go for 7 and
let's
split
go
it in the
for
middle?
7.
Yeah.
And my reasoning behind that is kind of the habitat does exist in the Cairngorms. I think more could be brought back into different areas, because that's already something they've done, is kind of split them into different groups so that they can be managed separately. And then also, I guess some for educational purposes. That's already something that happens in the UK, that they're there in sort of little farm. It's not ideal habitat, but it's on kind of...
Our local garden centre has reindeer at the moment.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it wouldn't be ideal habitat for them and they wouldn't be wild, but for an educational sort of side of things, they could maybe be brought back elsewhere.
That would be cool.
But
so yeah, we hope you've enjoyed this Christmas kind of themed episode for reindeer or caribou. And if Christmas isn't your thing or you celebrate a different festivity at this time, we hope nonetheless you have enjoyed this episode on reindeer and caribou. I'm going to have to keep kicking myself. I'm going to start saying, we hope you've enjoyed this episode on Rangifer tarandus.
Just do it, that's good.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks so much. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you want more updates on upcoming podcasts and things like that, please subscribe to the Grizzly YouTube channel. And then we also post updates on Instagram as well, which is Biome by Grizzly. And we also post funky animal stuff. So we are Emma Hodson Wildlife and Roby Watkinson Wildlife. So thanks for listening and we will see you next time.
See you next time.